themselves was replaced with an updated compilation of articles entitled Shepherd the Flock of God, which is now the primary text from which an elder takes guidance on his congregation. Additional information in support of the Jehovah's Witness Church's theocratic policies is made available to congregation members through the Watchtower and Awake magazines and other publications. Rodney Spinks of the Service Department will give evidence that the current policies of the Jehovah's Witness Church for dealing with an accusation of child sexual abuse are outlined in the following 4 publications. Firstly, the Bible. The English edition is the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures. Secondly, the Elder's Handbook. Thirdly, Watchtower Society publications, such as Organized to Do Jehovah's Will. And fourthly, letters sent to all bodies of elders, in particular, a letter dated 1 October 2012, which consolidated and replaced into one letter the spiritual advice and guidance provided in various past letters from preceding years as to how Jehovah's Witnesses handle allegations of child sexual abuse. Evidence will be put before the Royal Commission that the current policies and procedures relating to child sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witness Church are supplemented, in particular, by the following material. First, a pivotal Watchtower article entitled Let Us Abhor What is Wicked, published in January 1997, which clarified in biblical terms the principles to which a congregation should have regard in considering how a child molester should be viewed and treated. And secondly, updated guidelines issued by the governing body to all branch officers in August 2013 regarding how service desks should field questions from elders regarding child abuse matters. Elders within the Jehovah's Witness Church are given periodic training on the implementation of its policies and procedures. The training takes the form of one-day programs or seminars called Kingdom Ministry Schools. There will be evidence regarding the established disciplinary procedure adopted by the Church for responding to allegations of child sexual abuse in Australia. Documents will be tendered and evidence given showing that the Jehovah's Witness Church considers that it is only authorized to address child sexual abuse in accordance with scriptural direction. The Jehovah's Witness Church recognizes child abuse to be a gross sin and crime. Its official position is that they abhor child sexual abuse and will not protect any perpetrator of such repugnant acts. Child sexual abuse is defined by the Jehovah's Witness Church as follows. Child sexual abuse generally includes sexual intercourse with a minor, oral or anal sex with a minor, fondling the genitals, breasts or buttocks of a minor, voyeurism of a minor, indecent exposure to a minor, soliciting a minor for sexual conduct, or any kind of involvement with child pornography. Depending on the circumstances of the case, it may also include sexting with a minor. Sexting describes the sending of nude photos, semi-nude photos, or sexually explicit text messages electronically, such as by phone. According to the Jehovah's Witness Church, child sexual abuse is captured by the scriptural offenses, firstly, porneia, which is immoral use of the genitals between two people, and secondly, brazen or loose conduct, which includes fondling of breasts, explicitly immoral proposals, showing pornography to a child, voyeurism, indecent exposure, and thirdly, gross uncleanliness, which is heavy petting. Jehovah's Witnesses are taught from the Bible that they have a personal responsibility to report wrongdoing to elders. If the wrongdoer does not voluntarily come forward, upon receipt of an allegation, elders are directed to immediately call the branch office for direction based on the circumstances of each case. 2 elders from the congregation are also directed to immediately call the legal department for legal advice on mandatory reporting obligations. The legal department is instructed to refer the elders to the service department for scriptural direction on theocratic or judicial aspects of the case and how to spiritually comfort and support the victim. The service department also provides guidance on when and how elders should interview a young victim of child abuse. 2 elders are directed to investigate every allegation of child sexual abuse by speaking with the victim, the alleged offender, and any other witnesses if necessary. The The weight given to the testimony of youths is at the discretion of the investigating elders. Elders are not authorized to take congregational action unless the child sexual abuse is proven according to biblical standards, which are satisfied by evidence of a confession from the accused or the testimony of two credible witnesses to the same incident, or the testimony of two witnesses to separate incidents of the same kind of wrongdoing, or strong circumstantial evidence testified to by at least two witnesses. Whereby those rules, there is insufficient evidence to substantiate the alleged child sexual abuse, the matter is held in abeyance, and the elders are directed to, quote, remain vigilant with regard to the conduct and activity of the accused. In this event, no further action is taken in relation to the complaint, and the matter is left in Jehovah's hands. If sufficient evidence is discovered, the elders must determine whether a judicial committee should be appointed to give scriptural discipline to the wrongdoer. Child sexual abuse is recognized as an offense for which a judicial committee should be formed. The Royal Commission will hear that over the past 65 years, the requirement that there be two or more witnesses has prevented at least 125 allegations of child sexual abuse from proceeding to a judicial committee. That is not unexpected, given that by its nature, there are very seldom witnesses to child sexual abuse beyond the survivor and the perpetrator. The Judicial Committee is comprised of 3 or more elders to determine, firstly, if the individual is guilty of violating God's laws, and secondly, whether the individual is genuinely repentant. Repentant involves a deep regret over a damaged relationship with Jehovah, remorse over the reproach brought upon Jehovah's name, and a severe longing to come back into God's favor. Documents will be tendered which show that the Jehovah's Witnesses consider that the degree of repentance ought to be commensurate with the degree of deviation. The Royal Commission will hear that since 1950, 563 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse were the subject of a Judicial Committee hearing. The Judicial Committee has wide-ranging sanctions available to it to deal with proven wrongdoing. If the wrongdoer is unrepentant, he is to be disfellowshipped from the congregation. To be disfellowshipped means to be excommunicated from or cast out of the Jehovah's Witness Church. Congregation members are directed not to associate with disfellowshipped persons. Disfellowshipping differs from disassociation, which is an action taken by an individual who no longer wants to be known as a Jehovah's Witness. If the wrongdoer is judged to be genuinely repentant, the sanction is to administer reproof of the wrongdoer. Reproval may be public or private, and is a lesser form of discipline that allows the wrongdoer to remain a member of the congregation. Public reproval is administered before onlookers and serves to discipline the wrongdoer whilst warning the congregation that wrongdoing has been committed. Private reproval involves telling the accused that he is reproved before only those aware of the wrongdoing. A person who is judicially reproved is disqualified from special privileges, such as serving in a position of authority. Judicial restrictions are also imposed on those who are reproved. The restrictions might include being counseled by the elders about appropriate behavior with children. A public announcement is made to the congregation regarding the fact, but not the grounds, of disfellowshipping or reproval. The Royal Commission will hear that since 1950, 401 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse were disfellowshipped, 78 of whom were disfellowshipped on more than one occasion, and 190 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse were reproved, 11 of whom were reproved on more than one occasion. Disfellowshipping decisions may be appealed within 7 days. Appeal committees are formed even if there seems to be no valid basis for it, comprising, to the extent possible, impartial elders from a different congregation who hear the case ab initio. A disfellowshipped person may be reinstated into the congregation after the passage of sufficient time if the Judicial Committee determines that the individual is truly repentant and the reasons for their removal from the congregation have been abandoned. In all cases of reinstatement, documents will be tendered which show that congregational restrictions should be applied. Since 1950, of 401 disfellowshipped alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse, 230 were later reinstated, 35 of whom were reinstated on more than one occasion. The case study will explore a number of risk management measures that the Jehovah's Witness Church has in place regarding how a congregation might deal with a person against whom an accusation of child molestation has been made. Mr. O'Brien will give evidence that the Jehovah's Witness Church believes that loving and protective parents are the best deterrent to child abuse. Mr. O'Brien's evidence will be that it is the position of the Jehovah's Witness Church that parental education of children about sex and the dangers of child sexual abuse can be a major factor in its prevention. He will say that the Jehovah's Witness Church continues to educate parents via study groups and publications to help protect their children from child sexual abuse. Documents will be tendered which show that the Jehovah's Witness Church considers the primary responsibility for the protection of children lies with parents. Mr. O'Brien will say that this is particularly so as the Jehovah's Witness Church does not have programs or facilities that separate children from their parents, such as schools or Sunday schools and so on. Mr. O'Brien will give evidence that elders are directed to report allegations of child abuse to authorities where mandatory reporting laws apply. The Royal Commission will hear evidence from Vincent Toole of the Legal Department of his understanding of the various mandatory reporting obligations that apply across Australian states. Documents will be tendered which show that if no mandatory reporting obligations apply, elders are directed that they do not themselves need to report. The evidence will show that where a matter becomes known to the authorities, elders are directed to disclose information in their possession where legally required to do so, unless ecclesiastical privilege applies. The Royal Commission will hear evidence that elders are directed never to discourage or sanction anyone from reporting an allegation of child sexual abuse to the authorities, and that if asked, they must make clear that this is a personal decision and a victim's absolute right. The Royal Commission will hear evidence from at least one survivor witness who, contrary to this policy, was discouraged from reporting her abuse to secular authorities by elders in the Jehovah's Witness Church. Documents will be tendered which show this is consistent with the Jehovah's Witnesses' policy not to resort to secular courts to resolve personal disputes with fellow Christians, but to rely on the elders. Evidence will be put before the Royal Commission that of the 1,006 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse identified by the Jehovah's Witness Church since 1950, not one was reported by the Church to secular authorities. This suggests that it is the practice of the Jehovah's Witness Church to retain information regarding child sexual abuse offences, but not to report allegations of child sexual abuse to the police or other relevant authorities. This case study will consider whether the practice of the Jehovah's Witnesses Church of not reporting allegations of child sexual abuse to secular authorities potentially exposes members of the Church to criminal liability for concealment of serious indictable offences under Section 316 of the Crimes Act of 1900 in New South Wales, and failure to disclose sexual offences against minors under Section 327 of the Crimes Act 1958 of the State of Victoria. The case study will consider the interaction of these offences with the confessional privilege provided for in Section 127 of the Evidence Act of 1995 of the Commonwealth and replicated legislation in force in New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, and the Northern Territory. It is anticipated that documents will be tendered before the Royal Commission which will show that the Australia Branch Office have considered that confessional privilege would apply in circumstances where the perpetrator confessed to a child sexual abuse. The Royal Commission will hear evidence of the circumstances in which confessions relating to child sexual abuse are made to elders within a congregation, and documents recording the circumstances of such confessions then provided to the branch office. Mr. O'Brien will say that the Jehovah's Witness Church complies fully with legislative requirements to ensure all relevant persons have the necessary clearances for working with children. Mr. Toole will give evidence that there are approximately 7,000 elders and ministerial servants currently serving in Jehovah's Witnesses congregations in Australia who have obtained child-related police checks. The Jehovah's Witness Church offers theocratic guidance on the sharing of information between relevant bodies of elders through letters of introduction when a member moves from one congregation to another. When a known child molester moves to another congregation, elders are instructed to send a letter of introduction with full and complete information about the person's background and current situation to the elders of the new congregation. Where an accused does not classify as a known child molester because there was an allegation of child abuse, but this was not scripturally proven, the branch office determines what information regarding the accusation may be shared with the new congregation. Where a disfellowship person moves to a new congregation before applying for reinstatement, the new elders are directed to seek relevant information from the old congregation to determine genuine repentance for the purposes of any reinstatement application. The Royal Commission will hear evidence that elders and ministerial servants hold positions of trust within the congregations. The Jehovah's Witness Church offers theocratic guidance on the qualification of a known child molester for such positions of responsibility. Mr. Spinks will give evidence that an elder or ministerial servant is immediately removed if he is found to have engaged in child sexual abuse. Documents will be tendered at the hearing which show that elders are instructed to allow considerable time to pass before extending privileges of service to a former child abuser. Since 1950, 28 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse were appointed to positions of authority after having been the subject of allegations of child sexual abuse. Further, of 127 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse deleted as elders or ministerial servants as a result of allegations of child sexual abuse, 16 were later reappointed. In September 2014, the Jehovah's Witness Church revised its screening process for appointments to elder or ministerial positions. The current procedure requires the nominee to pass the Service Department's check for anything that may disqualify the individual from appointment and to answer certain questions regarding whether he has ever been involved with child sexual molestation. Mr. Toole will give evidence regarding the document retention policies of the Jehovah's Witness Church in relation to records of child sexual abuse. The current policy provides that records concerning an individual accused of child molestation are to be indefinitely retained in the Congregational Confidential File. The Royal Commission will hear evidence that this has been a long-standing practice of the Jehovah's Witness Church. The Royal Commission has been contacted by 57 persons about child sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witness Church. Of these, 34 are themselves survivors of child sexual abuse in the church. The Royal Commission will hear evidence from 2 women, each of whom was sexually abused as a child in the Jehovah's Witness Church. Their cases are considered to be the most appropriate for the purposes of this case study. They are expected to testify about their experiences of growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, being sexually abused by Jehovah's Witnesses who were in positions of authority, being discouraged from associating with non-Jehovah's Witnesses, the distress they experienced throughout the Judicial Committee hearing process, which involved being interviewed by a panel of males without any support, the blame that each accused sought to place on them as survivors, the absence of an explained purpose to the meetings and interviews to which they were subjected, and being discouraged from approaching authorities. The Royal Commission will hear from both survivors that the impact of the child sexual abuse and the response of the Jehovah's Witness Church is ongoing. I'll summarize first the case of BCB and then the case of BCG. A person given the pseudonym BCB began associating with Jehovah's Witnesses Church when she was 10 years old. and was formally baptized as a Jehovah's Witness at age 18. Between 1980 and 1986, BCB regularly stayed overnight at the house of the Neal family, of whom the father was Bill Neal, one of two elders in the Narrogin congregation in Western Australia. BCB's evidence will be that she attended weekly Bible studies led by Bill Neal at the Narrogin Kingdom Hall and at Mr. Neal's house. From 15 years of age, BCB was groomed and sexually abused by Mr. Neal. BCB's evidence will be that Bill Neal remained a respected elder within the congregation whilst he continued to abuse BCB. Notwithstanding this abuse, it will be BCB's evidence that she continued to respect Mr. Neal and felt unable to disclose the abuse because of his position. It will be BCB's evidence that in about 1991 she disclosed Mr. Neal's abuse to a Jehovah's Witness acquaintance. Thereafter, the other elder in the congregation, Max Hawley, approached BCB about Mr. Neal's conduct. Mr. Hawley then arranged a meeting with Bill Neal, BCB, and BCB's husband. The Royal Commission will hear that during this meeting, BCB endured Bill Neal making inappropriate jokes about his conduct that was the subject of the meeting. It will be BCB's evidence that having to discuss her abuse in front of a room full of men, including the perpetrator, was very distressing. The Royal Commission will hear that BCB felt unable to report the full extent of Bill Neal's abuse at the meeting. Max Hawley organized the second meeting, which was attended by BCB, BCB's husband, Bill Neal, and Doug Jackson, who was the circuit overseer for the Narrogin congregation. During this meeting, Bill Neal lacked remorse and sought to blame BCB for wearing revealing clothing. It will be BCB's evidence that at both meetings she felt unsafe and uncomfortable disclosing the full extent of Bill Neal's abuse. Further, BCB's evidence will be that neither the purpose nor the outcome of the meetings was ever explained to her by the elders. The Royal Commission will hear evidence that following the committee meeting, Max Hawley discouraged BCB from further disclosures of abuse, quote, out of respect for the Neal family. BCB's evidence will be that she was left feeling unsupported by the congregation and was instead encouraged to respect her abuser. The Royal Commission will hear that Bill Neal stepped down as an elder, but that the grounds were not announced to the congregation. Notwithstanding abuse by Bill Neal, the Royal Commission will hear that BCB was still expected to attend Bible studies held at the Neal's house and continued to see Bill Neal several times a week at congregational meetings. The Royal Commission will hear that Bill Neal may have later been reappointed as an elder. BCB will give evidence that in about July 2014, after she had indicated that she was considering reporting her abuse to the Royal Commission, Joe Bellow, an elder in her congregation at the time, asked if BCB, quote, really wants to drag Jehovah's name through the mud. The Commission will hear evidence that BCB felt brainwashed into believing that speaking with worldly people would bring reproach upon Jehovah's name. BCB's evidence will be that by reporting her story, she is riddled with guilt for betraying the Jehovah's Witness Church. The Royal Commission will hear from 3 elders regarding their role in handling BCB's allegation of abuse against Bill Neal. Max Hawley served as an elder in the Narrogin congregation from 1988. He will give evidence regarding his involvement in handling BCB's allegations of child sexual abuse by Bill Neal made in about 1991. Mr. Hawley's evidence will be that in circumstances where Bill Neal denied any intentional conduct, the rule requiring 2 or more witnesses meant that BCB's allegations could not be proven according to the scriptures. Ultimately, Bill Neal's removal as an elder was recommended by Mr. Hawley and Mr. Jackson because BCB's allegations had cast a cloud over Bill Neal's qualifications. Following Bill Neal's removal, he continued to attend meetings and was not placed on any specific restrictions. Documents will be tendered which show that the elders considered the spirituality and the seductiveness of the complainant in determining the complaint. Doug Jackson served as a circuit overseer in Western Australia between 1990 and 1998. The Royal Commission will hear evidence regarding Mr. Jackson's involvement in the Judicial Committee hearing into the allegations against Bill Neal during his visit to the Narragansett congregation in early 1992. Mr. Jackson will give evidence regarding his recommendation that Bill Neal no longer met the scriptural qualifications for serving as an elder. Notwithstanding Bill Neal's admission to improper conduct, a document will be tendered which shows that in the same letter that recommends his removal as an elder, Mr. Jackson recommends that Bill Neal be reappointed, quote, once this has died down and it appears that Brother Neal again has the freedom of speech. Joe Bello has served as an elder since 1991. The Royal Commission will hear evidence regarding Mr. Bello's involvement in providing shepherding care and assistance to BCB during visits to her family in 2012, following BCB's disclosure of Bill Neal's abuse. Mr. Bello will give evidence that he did not intend to discourage BCB from approaching the Royal Commission. A person given the pseudonym BCG was baptized as a Jehovah's Witness when she was about 16 years old. The Royal Commission will hear evidence of BCG's experience growing up in a strict Jehovah's Witness family. BCG will give evidence that her father, BCH, was a highly regarded Jehovah's Witness who was appointed as a ministerial servant in the Mariba congregation in far north Queensland in about 1984. BCG's evidence will be that her father was influential within the congregation because he was well respected amongst members. As head of the household, BCH dictated and enforced compliance with household rules. BCG was not permitted to associate with anybody outside the Jehovah's Witness community and was taught from a young age that worldly people could not be trusted. BCG was not permitted by her parents to attend school after year 10 because choosing higher education over Jehovah was frowned upon by the Jehovah's Witness Church. When she was 17, BCG was sexually abused by her father on a number of occasions over a 2-week period whilst her mother and siblings were away. BCG tried to report her father's abuse to 2 elders within the Mariba congregation, both of whom were friends of her father. BCG will give evidence that both elders refused to speak with BCG without her father being present. It was not until BCG found the courage to tell a male friend who approached BCG's father and the elders that the matter was investigated by the elders. BCG was interviewed by 3 elders, all friends of her father, on a number of occasions. On each occasion, BCG was alone without any support, and on one occasion, her father was also present. BCG's evidence will be that instead of being protected and supported as a victim, the elders primarily sat in judgment of her credibility as a witness and made her feel to blame. BCG will give evidence that the elders forced her to directly confront her father with her abuse allegations. Her father's response was to threaten BCG and to blame her for seducing him. The Royal Commission will hear that when BCG disclosed the abuse to her mother advised that her father had previously abused BCG's older sister. At around the same time, BCG's 2 younger sisters confirmed that they were also victims of their father's abuse. The Royal Commission will hear that although the elders were advised of the additional victims, they did not take them into consideration in their investigation. BCG's father was ultimately disfellowshipped, not for his sexual abuse of BCG, but for unrelated, as it's put, loose conduct and lying. BCG will give evidence that the elders would not consider the evidence of her sister's abuse because they were not witnesses to the same event. BCG was devastated that her father's sexual abuse did not appear to qualify as wrongdoing in the eyes of the Jehovah's Witness Church. BCG's father immediately appealed his disfellowshipping. BCG was brought before an appeal committee alone to be interviewed again about the abuse. It was at this time that her father admitted the abuse and his disfellowshipping was upheld with grounds of porneia added. The Royal Commission will hear that BCG's father was reinstated after only a few years. BCG will testify that she was concerned for the safety of the congregation, but was discouraged from reporting to the police and was herself threatened with disfellowshipping. In December 1995, BCG wrote to Watchtower Australia regarding her father's premature reinstatement. Watchtower Australia responded in February 1996 by counselling faith in Jehovah and advising that it would make inquiries into the matters raised. The Royal Commission will hear that when BCG eventually left the Jehovah's Witness Church, she was completely ostracized by members of her local congregation. BCG then reported her father's abuse to the police. BCG's father, BCH, was ultimately convicted in 2004 for unlawful and indecent assault and attempted rape of BCG and sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. BCG's evidence will be that her experience of 3 criminal trials was easy compared to her experience of sitting through the Judicial and Appeal Committee meetings. The Royal Commission will hear evidence from the 3 elders of the Mariba congregation, that's Dino Ali, Ronald DeRoy, and Kevin Bowditch, regarding their role in handling BCG's allegations of abuse by her father that she reported in about May 1989. Dino Ali and Ronald DeRoy will give evidence that in circumstances where BCH denied the allegations, the Judicial Committee was bound by the rule requiring 2 or more witnesses and did not have sufficient proof of the child's sexual abuse to take judicial action. It was for this reason the Royal Commission will hear that BCH was ultimately disfellowshipped, not for child sexual abuse, but for loose conduct and for lying to the elders about his conduct. Ronald DeRoy and Kevin Bowditch will give evidence that it was not until BCH confessed to the sexual abuse of BCG during the Appeal Committee hearing in 1989 that the grounds for BCH's disfellowshipping were extended to include his sexual abuse of BCG. In 1990, BCH applied to the Beanley East congregation for reinstatement. The Royal Commission will hear that Rodney Spinks and Monty Baker, both elders in the Beanley East congregation at that time, regarding their involvement on the Judicial Committee appointed to consider BCH's reinstatement application. Rodney Spinks will give evidence of BCH's give evidence that BCH's reinstatement application was rejected because he did not display genuine repentance. Mr. Baker will give evidence regarding the process of liaising with the Mariba congregation, which was responsible for the decision to disfellowship BCH to obtain relevant information to assess BCH's reinstatement application. Alan Penchef was an elder of the Logan Home congregation. He chaired the Judicial Committee that disfellowshipped BCH again in 2003 for lying. Mr. Penchef will give evidence that he was not aware of any reason to restrict BCH's contact with children at the time BCH joined the Logan Home congregation, and that he only became aware of BCH's abuse allegations when criminal proceedings were brought against him between about 2001 and 2004. The Mariba congregation recommended certain restrictions be placed on BCH due to the gravity of the wrongs committed, but did not recommend any restrictions regarding BCH's exposure to children. Mr. Toole will give evidence that in January 2003, he provided a memorandum to the service desk which observed that the primary issue before the Logan Home Judicial Committee in 2003 was BCH's lying as opposed to his sexual abuse of BCG. In about 2001, criminal proceedings commenced against BCH for child sexual abuse, and in 2004, he was convicted and sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. The Royal Commission will hear evidence from Jason Davies, a former Queensland DPP solicitor, regarding his involvement in the prosecution of the criminal proceedings against BCH. Mr. Davies will give evidence of his observations of the influence of the Jehovah's Witness faith on the behavior of those involved in the criminal proceedings. Mr. Davies' evidence will be that matters of faith sometimes take precedence over secular moral obligations and norms, and that the religious persuasion of those involved in the criminal proceedings was integral to understanding the behavior of the accused, the victim, and the witnesses, at least in their reluctance to go to the police. The Royal Commission will hear that the delay between the child sexual abuse and the time at which allegations came to police attention is in part attributable to the Church's practice of dealing with offending internally in accordance with its theocratic rules without referring matters to secular authorities. The Royal Commission will hear of the repeated applications for reinstatement made by BCH following his release from prison, and of the factors taken into consideration by the Jehovah's Witness Church in considering these applications. The Royal Commission will hear evidence of the involvement of the Church's service desk in guiding the consideration of BCH's pleas for reinstatement. Mr. O'Brien will give evidence that to date he is unaware of any claims for redress having been made in relation to child sexual abuse concerning the Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia. Watchtower Australia does not hold any insurance policy which provides cover for any claims relating to child sexual abuse. Documents will be tendered which show that in 2008, Watchtower Australia considered the formation of a separate legal entity, apparently for the purposes of minimizing liability in the case of litigation. It is expected that the case study will provide the Royal Commission with insights into systemic issues within its terms of reference in the area of institutional responses to concerns and allegations about incidents of child sexual abuse. In particular, the systemic issues that are expected to be considered arising from this case study are the following. 1, the influence of theocratic beliefs on the way in which religious institutions handle complaints and manage the risk of child sexual abuse and their interaction with government authorities. 2, the management of complaints of allegations of child sexual abuse within an institution without reference to external authorities and the impact that that approach may have on the institution's capacity to protect children. 3, the impact of an institution's internal disciplinary mechanisms on criminal processes. 4, the impact of the record-keeping practices of institutions on the ability of those institutions to manage the risk of child sexual abuse and to respond to victims of abuse. 5, the efficacy of mechanisms to prevent child sexual abuse. And 6, the adequacy of systems to support and rehabilitate survivors of child sexual abuse. This public hearing of the Royal Commission has been listed, obviously commencing today and until Friday, the 7th of August.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Stewart. I think we might take the short adjournment now so that the cameras can be reorganised. We'll adjourn.
We'll stand.
And she's accompanied by her husband for support.
It will be necessary for you to to be sworn. Will you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
An oath on the Bible.
The Bible. Now, I think there's a Bible there, which is
yes.
Could you take that in your hand, please, and stand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission.
That the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you. Take a seat, please. Yes, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Your Honour. Do you have a copy of your statement dated 10 July 2015 with you?
Yes.
Are there any amendments or corrections you'd like to make to that statement?
No.
Can you confirm the statement? I tender the statement, Your Honour.
It'll become Exhibit 29-1.
I'd ask you to read your statement, perhaps commencing at the third paragraph.
My full name is BCB. I was born on redacted 1967 and I'm 47 years old. I'm married to BCC and we have 2 daughters. My husband owns a redacted business and I work for him keeping the books. I was formally baptised as a Jehovah's Witness when I was 18 years old. I grew up on a farm near Wickerpen in Western Australia. I lived on the farm until I was around 19 with my dad, my mum and my younger brother. In 1977, when I was about 10 years old, my mum became a Jehovah's Witness. Between about 1977 and 1979, my mum used to take me and my brother with her to a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses meetings each week in Corrigan. Corrigan was about an hour's drive away from where we lived. My dad and I were quite close up until I was about 10 years old.
PCV, would you like Mr. Stewart to read your statement, please?
Thank you, I should be all right.
At any
If you,
point,
need,
I
if you
can-
need a pause or you want Mr. Stewart or your husband to help, then let me know.
Okay. I think I just need a minute. Can I just have a minute?
I'm sorry?
Can I just have a minute?
Would you like us to adjourn for a minute?
Just a minute. Thank
Okay,
you.
we'll adjourn very briefly. You let us know when you're ready.
Yeah.
But if you want your husband to read or Mr. Stewart to read, that's quite appropriate. But we'll take a brief pause and come back when you're ready.
All stand.
dad and I were quite close up until I was about 10 years old. However, when I started attending Jehovah's Witness meetings with my mum, we drifted apart emotionally. My dad wasn't a Jehovah's Witness and never attended Jehovah's Witness meetings with us. He never stopped my mum, my brother or me from attending Jehovah's Witness meetings. In or around 1979, my mum and dad decided that I should go to high school in Narrogin. Narrogin was about an hour's drive from where we lived. Because I was at school in Narrogin, my mum decided to join the Narrogin congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. My mum, brother and I attended meetings there every Wednesday, Friday and Sunday. The Sunday and Wednesday meetings of the Narrogin congregation were held at the Narrogin Kingdom Hall and were attended by the whole congregation. At these meetings, one of the elders would usually deliver a public talk from the platform based on a reading from the Watchtower magazine or give a talk from the Bible. At these meetings, the elders would also lead question and answer sessions and give specific training about our door-to-door preaching. The Wednesday meeting was referred to as the Theocratic Ministry School, and children were allowed to give talks about the Jehovah's Witness beliefs at this meeting. I remember that I sometimes gave talks at these meetings. The Friday meeting was referred to as book study and usually took place at someone's house. At this meeting, a small group of families would come together to discuss biblical scripture. I first met Bill and Bronwyn Neal and their children at a large Jehovah's Witness party in or around 1979 when I was about 12 years old. Bill and Bronwyn had a daughter named BCE, who was 2 years younger than me. BCE and I became very good friends. In or around 1980, Bill Neal was one of two elders at the Narrogin congregation. At the time, I understood that Bill's position as an elder gave him authority in the Jehovah's Witness community. He used to give talks at the weekly congregation meetings from the platform in the Kingdom Hall. The other elder in the Narrogin congregation at the time was Jack Shaler. I looked up to Bill because he was an elder. Everybody in the congregation respected and trusted Bill, including my mum. Between about 1980 and 1986, I spent a lot of time with BCE at the Neal family house. I used to stay at BCE's house at least once a week. Often I would attend the Friday night book study meeting led by Bill at the Neal's house, and then stay over at the Neal's house until the Sunday meeting at the Kingdom Hall. BCE's mum, Bronwyn, treated me like a daughter, and I felt really close to her. I used to call Bill Uncle Bill. I recall that the Neal family talked a lot about church issues in the house. They used to discuss their belief in Jehovah. Bill in particular used to explain that all ideas and ways of behaving should be figured out according to what the Bible says. I remember that Bill would discourage BCE and me from forming friendships with other children who were not Jehovah's Witnesses at school. The Neal family always seemed to me to be an affectionate family, which I really liked. For example, everyone always kissed each other on the lips when they said goodnight or goodbye to one another. I remember that Bill and Bronwyn were very open with their kids about sex. Bill would often make sexual jokes in front of me. My mum never talked about anything to do with sex. I had grown up understanding that it was not something that you were supposed to talk about. In or around 1982, when I was about 14 years old, I was staying over at BCE's house as I did almost every week. I was having a shower and BCE, who I often shared the bathroom with, said, "What's that on your tummy?" I looked down and noticed I had a rash on my stomach. Despite me not wanting her to, BCE went and got her mum. I only had my knickers and a singlet on. Bronwyn said she wanted to show Bill. I said I don't want him to see me. I never let my dad see me in my knickers, so I was really embarrassed. Bill came and looked at my stomach, and I remember feeling really uncomfortable about him seeing me like that. Later in 1982, I was again staying over at BCE's house. On this night, as I was saying goodnight to Bill in the hallway of their house, he kissed me goodnight on the lips. Initially, this did not seem unusual to me, but he then stuck his tongue into my mouth. I pulled away and looked at him in shock. He looked at me and gave me a queer, smirk-type smile. I found myself half smiling back. I was so surprised by what he had done that I just froze. I didn't know what else to do. Every time I stayed at the Neal family house after that night until the end of 1986, I had to endure Bill tongue-kissing me goodnight. This often occurred in the hallway just outside BCE's bedroom. Apart from putting his tongue in my mouth when I stayed over at BCE's house, Bill's behaviour towards me did not seem to change. He continued to behave the same way around his family. He continued to lead the Jehovah's Witness meetings and to be respected by the rest of the congregation. Since nothing was said about what he was doing to me, I felt like I had to act like nothing was happening. I really didn't know what to do. I was scared and ashamed. I felt that I was somehow responsible for what Bill was doing to me. I felt like I couldn't say anything about it because I was worried that I would get into trouble and that Bill would belt me like he belted his kids when they were naughty. I respected Bill because he was an elder. He was also BCE's dad and the head of the Neal household, but I had also come to fear him. Because of his position as an elder, I felt that I couldn't tell anyone about what he was doing to me. I felt that if I told someone, it would upset Bronwyn and BCE as well as the members of the congregation. Every time I thought about bringing what was happening to me out in the open, the consequences were too scary, so I stopped thinking about it. I felt like no one would believe me. A few months later, after Bill had once again tongue-kissed me goodnight at his house, BCE said to me, "Did my dad just kiss you for a long time?" I assumed that BCE must have seen Bill kiss me. I was scared of getting into trouble, so I said to her, "Don't worry, it's okay." I thought at the time that by not telling BCE what was happening, I was protecting her. I thought that if she found out, it might cause her family to break up. I now wish I had told her. On one occasion, in or around 1983, Bill and I were out doing door-to-door preaching together. I remember that at some point we were alone in Bill's combi van. Bill said to me, "What shall we do about our little problem?" I said to him, "I don't know." Bill then asked me, "Do you want me to talk to Brother Shayla about it? You know, if I do that, though, your mum and dad will find out." I replied no to Bill because when he mentioned that my parents would find out, I got scared. I was surprised that Bill suggested speaking to Brother Shayla. At the time, I already felt guilty about what Bill was doing to me. But when Bill suggested speaking to Brother Shayla, it removed any doubt in my mind that what was happening between Bill and me was my fault. At the end of 1983, having completed Year 10, I left high school. The following year, I studied a business course, and in around April 1984, I got a job, redacted. I continued to stay at the Neal house regularly from around this time until the end of 1986. One night, in or around 1984, when I was about 17, I stayed overnight at the Neal family house. While I was showering in the bathroom with the door locked, I heard a noise. I looked up and saw Bill perving on me over the top of the shower curtain. I guess he must have been standing on the basin to be able to see. I don't know how, but I assumed that Bill had unlocked the bathroom door from the outside. I screamed, "Get out," at Bill, and he left the room. Bill and I never spoke of the shower incident. On another night, also in 1984, and not long after the shower incident, I remember that Bill came into the BCE's room where she and I were making lots of noise and threw me over the bed. He started belting me across the buttocks with his belt. It really stung me, and afterwards I had a dark red welt across my backside. Apart from the physical pain, I remember feeling humiliated, angry and shocked by what Bill had done. On 26th of October 1985, I was formally baptised as a Jehovah's Witness in a ceremony that involved being submerged in a pool of water. At the baptism, many of the other girls wore modest swimming costumes with T-shirts over the top. I remember that Bill refused to let BCE or I wear T-shirts over the top of our swimming costumes. In or around 1985, when I was around 18, I noticed Bill's behaviour towards me became more sexual. He used to say things to me in front of his wife, Bronwyn, and in front of BCE, like, "You're a nymphomaniac, and if you weren't in the truth, you'd be a prostitute." What he said didn't make sense to me because I was a virgin. I recall that on one occasion, in or around the end of 1985, Bill tongue-kissed me in this lounge room. As he was doing it, I heard Bronwyn say sharply, "Bill." I remember thinking that we would be in trouble, but nothing more was said about the incident by Bronwyn or Bill. Up until the summer of 1985-86, I thought Bill's behaviour was just something unpleasant that I had to put up with so I could have a good time with BCE and the rest of the Neal family, who I liked. One day in the summer of 1985-86, while I was in the pantry in the kitchen of the Neal family house, Bill came in, shut the door and started kissing me. As I was older by then, I felt able to try and resist his kissing. Bill yelled at me and said to kiss him. He pushed me up against the wall and told me to pull my dress up so he could see my underwear. Thankfully, someone came into the kitchen at that point, and Bill stopped and left me alone in the pantry. In or around October 1986, I left my job, redacted, and I was very unhappy at the time because I was feeling pressured by people in the Narrogin congregation to preach full-time. After I left my job, redacted, I moved into the Neal's house for a couple of months while I was looking for a new job in Narrogin. BC was still living at home when I moved in with the Neal family. Bill continued to harass me while I lived at the Neal house. At the same time, he remained a respected elder in the congregation. I became really resentful of him. I stopped referring to him as Uncle Bill and instead referred to him as Bill. Looking back, I think this was my way of rebelling against him. One day, at the end of 1986, when I was 19, I had been having a shower in the family bathroom at the Neal's house. Although the rule in the Neal's house was not to lock the bathroom door, I used to lock the door because I wanted my privacy. That day, I had just stepped out of the shower and was naked when the door suddenly opened and Bill walked in. I don't know how Bill unlocked the door. I guess that he may have unlocked it with a knife or even his fingernail. I know that Bill didn't walk in by accident because of the way he quickly opened the door, closed it again behind him, and stood against it, trapping me inside. Bill then told me, sit on the floor and open your legs. I didn't want to do what he was asking, but his manner was very threatening. I felt humiliated and scared. Angus, would you be able to read the next one?
I felt humiliated and scared. Bill then started fondling me and put his finger in my vagina. He then told me to stand up, and he proceeded to perform oral sex on me. I felt disgusted and uncomfortable. I knew that sex was something that people were meant to enjoy, and I remember thinking that there must be something wrong with me because I didn't like what was happening. The next day, I was lying in bed in my room, feeling sick, when Bill came into the room. He said to me, "Did you like it?" I assumed he was referring to the bathroom incident. Pointing at his crotch, he said to me, "It's better with this in." I asked him to leave, and he did. Once he had left the room, I got up, packed my bags, and went home to my parents' farm without saying goodbye to BCE. In or around early 1987, I remember telling BCE that I had been seeing a couple of boys. Not long after I told her that, BCE told me that Bill wanted to talk to me about my relationship with boys. She told me to meet Bill at the Neal family house. Even though the meeting was at his house, I understood that I was being asked to see Bill in his capacity as an elder, and that I had to do as I was told. I would never have chosen to speak to Bill about my relationships with boys otherwise. When I got to his house, Bill asked me to wait in BCE's room. He came into the room and asked me, can you show me your boobs? Although I had come to expect this behavior from Bill, I remember feeling shocked that he was asking me this. I remember that I let him look down my top. I don't know why I did what he asked. Looking back, I feel as though he could control me. Bill then said to me something like, "Can you make yourself orgasm?" I said yes, and he replied to me, "I thought so, you dirty bitch." Bill was an elder for as long as I knew him. I wasn't able to see at the time, but everything he did to me was in complete disregard of all the Jehovah's Witness rules, some of which he preached about sex and association between brothers and sisters. In 1989, I told my now husband, BCC, that Bill used to kiss me. I dreaded telling him, and I couldn't bring myself to tell him any more detail about what happened than this. When I told him, he started asking me questions about what exactly had happened, and I said to him, "Don't worry, it's all over now." I didn't want to say anything more because I was scared that BCC would tell someone. Later, in around 1991, a Jehovah's Witness acquaintance of mine, BCF, told me that she had been abused by her uncle and that she had tried to commit suicide. I told her what happened to me, but I didn't mention any names. Somehow she guessed that I was talking about Bill. I freaked out and asked her not to tell anyone.
Okay. I guess that BCF did tell others in the congregation, as a week or so later, a young elder from the congregation called Max Hawley came to speak to me. Initially, I had no idea why he'd come to see me, but he eventually revealed that he'd come to talk to me about Bill and me. When he said this, I burst into tears. I told Max about most of what Bill had done, but I couldn't mention the final bathroom incident when Bill had had oral sex with me. I was so ashamed. Max was very kind and supportive. He told me that what had happened was not my fault and that I shouldn't blame myself. Soon after, Max arranged a meeting with Bill, BCC and me at my house. I don't remember anyone explaining the purpose of the meeting to me. At that meeting, Max said to me, I believe Bill asked you if you wanted to see his penis and you said no. I assumed that he was referring to the incident in the bedroom the morning after Bill had oral sex with me in the bathroom, even though I had not told him about this incident myself. Bill looked at me and said, "Don't you think I was joking?" And I said, "I don't know." I didn't understand why someone would joke about that sort of thing. Nobody at the meeting said anything about Bill's comment. I still don't understand why no one at the meeting told Bill that he shouldn't joke about those sorts of things. I did not talk about the incident in the bathroom at that first meeting. I didn't feel comfortable talking while Bill was in the room. After that first meeting, I felt like there was a lot of stuff I had been unable to say in front of Bill. I decided to go to Max's house after the meeting to clarify things. As a result of our conversation at his house, Max organised a second meeting at my house. The second meeting was attended by Max Hawley, Doug Jackson, Bill, my husband, BCC, and me. Doug Jackson was the circuit overseer for the Narrogin congregation. Max told me this meeting was a committee meeting. I was not aware at the time what the purpose of the meeting was or why Doug Jackson was attending. During the committee meeting, Bill was defensive. He said that I used to wear revealing clothing. I remember that Doug Jackson made it quite clear to both of us that the church has never allowed the victim's clothing as an excuse. Throughout the meeting, Bill looked at me defiantly. I felt like he was challenging me to tell the full story of what he had done. I felt uncomfortable and could not bring myself to tell the elders everything that had happened. I felt like I was still Bill's victim. I was still so scared of saying anything that would get me or Bill into trouble. I remember that at one point in the meeting, Max said to me, "Is there anything else you wish to tell us?" I remember looking across the room at Bill and saying no. It was already very hard to talk about sex in a room full of men. It was especially hard to talk about what Bill had done to me while he was sitting there in front of me. I didn't feel like it was a safe environment and I was scared of what the consequences would be if I told the whole truth. Perhaps if a sister who I was comfortable with had been there too, it might have been easier. At the end of the meeting, the elders asked Bill to say something to me, so he said, "I'm sorry." I took that to mean that he was sorry for everything that had happened, although his demeanour was not in any way remorseful, and I could tell that he wasn't sorry. Nobody explained to me what the outcome of the meeting was or if anything would happen to Bill as a result of what I had reported. After the meeting, Doug Jackson gave me a magazine article that had been published by the Watchtower a few years before. He encouraged me to read through it. The article was about child sexual abuse. At the time, I don't think I had thought of what had happened to me as child sexual abuse because Bill hadn't had sex with me. But reading that article made me realise that what happened to me was child sexual abuse. I don't remember discussing contacting the police with anybody at that time either, before or after the committee meeting. Not long after the committee meeting, Bronwyn Neal rang me and asked me about my conversation with BCF. I said to Bronwyn, BCF told me that she had been abused by her uncle, and I told BCF what had happened to me. Bronwyn said to me, Bill didn't abuse you. I got scared, so I said to Bronwyn, I didn't actually say that. What I told Bronwyn was true. I had never actually used the word abuse when I spoke to BCF or during my discussions with elders, as I hadn't understood at the time that I had been abused. As soon as I got off the phone to Bronwyn, I rang Max Hawley to tell him about what Bronwyn had said to me. He told me that he'd sorted out. Later that day, Max rang me back and said to me, BCB, the Neals have asked that you not tell any more people about Bill out of respect for the family. I respected Max and did as I was told. I didn't tell anyone else about what had happened to me, not even my best friend at the time. Thinking back, I now see that I was being asked to respect the man who had done those things to me, but nobody was offering me any respect or proper support. A few weeks after the committee meeting, the elders announced to the congregation that Bill had stepped down as an elder. I was sitting in the congregation at the time. The elders did not announce to the congregation why Bill was standing down. Although I understood the reasons for privacy, I have since felt that people in the congregation should have been warned about someone like Bill. After the committee meeting, I don't recall being offered any support by Doug Jackson or Max Hawley, though it's possible that they may have said something to me. Overall, however, I remember that I didn't feel supported. No one in the congregation talked to me about what had happened to me, and Bill's wife, Bronwyn, ignored me for some time. This was especially hard because I loved Bronwyn like a mother. Even though I had reported what Bill had done, I was still expected to attend book study meetings that were being held at the Neals' house. I continued to see Bill several times a week at congregational meetings and at annual district conventions. Everything just seemed to carry on as normal, but I felt physically sick every time I saw Bill. I continued to attend the Narrogin congregation for 3 more years and continued to see Bill at meetings during this period. In 1994, I moved out of the area and started attending a different Jehovah's Witness congregation. I understand that Bill has since died, although I don't know when. I still consider myself to be a Jehovah's Witness and until very recently attended meetings at the Redacted congregation in Western Australia. In or around December 2012, I provided a written statement to 2 elders in the Redacted congregation. Their names are Joe Bellow and David Wood. The statement summarised Bill's sexual abuse of me. I provided Joe and David with my statement as I thought that others might have also been abused by Bill and that my statement might be able to help support their cases. In or around July 2014, Joe Bellow came to visit BCC and me at my house on an unrelated matter. During this visit, I raised the subject of Bill's sexual abuse of me and told Joe that I was considering reporting my story to the Royal Commission. Around the same time, Joe Bellow rang and had a conversation with BCC on the phone. During the conversation, Joe said to BCC, "You should ask BCB if she really wants to drag Jehovah's name through the mud." When BCC told me what Joe had said, I felt upset. It was not me that gave Jehovah a bad name, it was Bill. For some time after the visit from Joe Bellow, I was quite upset. My mother encouraged me to write down my feelings. So I wrote a note recording my feelings at the time about Bill's sexual abuse of me, the response of the elders at Narrogin congregation, the response of the elders at the Redacted congregation, and my reasons for reporting my story to the Royal Commission. Sometime after, my mother handed this note to David Wood, one of the elders in the redacted congregation. The handwritten note is at WAT.0001.002.0497. In around September 2014, I contacted the Royal Commission and reported my story. I have huge feelings of guilt about coming forward with my story. I feel as though I am betraying the Jehovah's Witnesses and bringing reproach onto them. When I speak to officers at the Royal Commission, my chest gets tight. I have heart palpitations and I have difficulty breathing because of my anxiety about the betrayal. Since reporting my story to the Royal Commission, I have stopped attending meetings at redacted congregation. I am sad about this because it means that I no longer see a lot of my friends from the congregation. Telling my story to the Royal Commission has brought up a lot of feelings of anger in relation to what Bill did to me and the way I have been treated by the Jehovah's Witnesses. I've spent too many years suffering over this whole situation. It has held me back from living a normal life, and I really want to move on. The abuse definitely changed who I was. It destroyed my confidence and my self-esteem. Even though the sexual abuse stopped when I was 19, I have continued to feel like Bill's victim well into my adult life. I continued to keep Bill's sexual abuse of me a secret for a long time. Over the years of our marriage, I have told BCC more detail of what happened with Bill. It wasn't until just before my nervous breakdown, actually that's about 12 years ago, that I finally confided fully in some of my friends. Once I started talking about what happened, it was like opening a can of worms and I became very ill. I was lucky to get help from a wonderful psychiatrist. I've had a lot of therapy to address what Bill did to me, but I still have trouble feeling a sense of closure about what happened. I still feel that Bill was never made to face any consequences for what he did to me. I felt like Bill's position as an elder contributed to his power over me. I now think that I was brainwashed into thinking that speaking to people outside the church or to the worldly people would bring reproach upon Jehovah's name. I think that had I been allowed to speak to other non-Jehovah's Witness children at school, maybe someone might have reported what happened to me and I wouldn't have become the victim that I feel I am now. As Bill is now dead, I don't have to worry about seeing him at Jehovah's Witnesses conventions anymore. I still struggle with my thoughts and feelings about the abuse, but I have an amazing group of spiritual sisters and friends, as well as my lovely husband BCC and my two beautiful daughters. I would like to see a number of things change in the way that the Jehovah's Witnesses deal with child sexual abuse. First of all, I would like the Jehovah's Witnesses to take allegations of child abuse more seriously and report them to the police. I also think that those victims that are brave enough to report to elders should be properly supported and protected. I definitely did not feel protected when I disclosed my abuse to Max Hawley and Doug Jackson in 1991. I found the experience of reporting my abuse to a room full of men, including the man who had abused me, very distressing. I've never been offered any compensation by the Jehovah's Witnesses for what happened to me. I've never made any claim for compensation because I didn't think that I would be entitled to any. I'm worried about what others will think of me asking for compensation. I know that many people have been through worse suffering than me in their lives. I don't want more than I'm entitled to. I only want to be treated fairly as a victim of abuse that was perpetrated by the member of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I just want fair and just compensation for what Bill did.
Thank you. I do have a few questions I want to ask by way of clarification or elaboration. You speak in paragraph 12 of your statement, and perhaps that can come up on the screen. About meetings being held, including at someone's house. Were those meetings organized by the elders.
Yes.
And after Bill Neal had stood down, after the elders had met with you and so on, and he stood down, you say in paragraph 16 that you continued to attend meetings at the Neal's home. Did he, as presiding overseer, or who organised those meetings? Because he was no longer an elder. Were those meetings organised by?
They must have been organised by Max Hawley.
So those types of meetings, are they always organised by the elders?
Yes.
In the congregation?
Yes.
And did you ask not to have to continue attending meetings at the Neal's home?
I didn't. Did I ask? I did ask to change book study groups. That's right. I asked to go to the one at the hall.
Okay. Was that so you did not have to attend at the Neal's home?
Yes, I didn't want to, because Bronwyn wasn't talking to me, and I didn't want to see Bill in their house.
And who did you ask that of?
I don't remember, but maybe I spoke to my mum. Maybe I asked Max. Rena said, "Mate, oh my God."
That's all right. That's all right.
BCC said maybe I spoke to Max. I don't remember.
All right, that's fine. You don't remember. Do you remember what response you got?
I was just told that I had to go there.
All right. If we scroll up to 17 on the statement. You say in the last sentence that you remember being discouraged from forming friendships with other children who were not Jehovah's Witnesses. This is when you were still at school.
Yeah.
Did you have an understanding of why you were discouraged from forming such friendships, or what was said to be the teaching behind that?
There are a couple of scriptures. One was bad association spoils useful habits. And the other one was that Jesus said that we are no part of this world. So I had friends at school. They were nice girls. But we were just friends at school, not outside of school.
And in what you were taught as a young girl growing up in the Jehovah's Witness church, were you taught anything about the police or how to view or understand the police and their role?
No, I don't remember anything specifically being said about the police.
You say in paragraph 30, perhaps we can go to that. You said at the end of 1983, having completed year 10, you left high school. Why did you leave high school at that time?
The Neals didn't encourage further education. And they encouraged us to either get married and have children or to pioneer, which is preach full time. And so I didn't really consider doing TAE as it was in those days. Didn't consider going to university. It wasn't a consideration for me. And so I was going to leave after year 10, but my dad said, "You don't have any qualifications to get a job, So he encouraged me to do a Year 11 vocational business course, which was actually part of the school. And I'm glad he did that, because then I was able to get a good job.
And your father was not part of the Jehovah's Witness Church, is that
No.
right? And your experience of what the Neils told you about, presumably their daughters, about leaving school, was that something you experienced in other families in the Jehovah's Witness Church?
It just wasn't, university wasn't really talked about as an option. Most people just left after year 10 and got a job.
We could look at your paragraph 73. Say that after you contacted the Royal Commission and reported your story, you had huge feelings of guilt about coming forward with the story, and you felt as though you were betraying the Jehovah's Witnesses in doing so. Are you able to identify what is the source of that guilt? Why do you feel that it's a betrayal?
Because it's an ugly story, and it doesn't portray them in a very good light, like the people who dealt with the brothers who dealt with my situation. And I feel like I do feel like I'm dragging Jehovah's name through the mud.
You've given in your statement some details of the impact that the abuse has had on your health. Is there anything you'd like to add in relation to that, or anything you'd like the brothers to know about the effect of child sexual abuse?
Yeah, I've been, when I had my breakdown, I was not well before that. I was going downhill for a long time before that. I was getting paranoid. I was thinking that people at school, when I dropped the kids off at school, I was thinking that they were all talking about me and judging me. I was thinking that the neighbours were all judging me, talking about me. One morning, the lawnmower man came to mow the lawns, and I thought he was going around to all the doors and windows and deliberately trying to scare me. And I went into the games room with the kids and hid behind the doll's house, and I said to them, "Don't let him see me." And they were laughing at me and going, "What's wrong with you, Mummy?" And I think I scared them a little bit, or they just thought I was being strange. And when I told my friend about what happened to me, because she knew, she guessed that this is the reason why I had my breakdown, was because I told my close friend about a little bit about what happened, and she knew who it was, and I got scared that it was all going to come out and everyone was going to know about it, and it really scared me. And the next couple of weeks I lost 15 kilos because I was so anxious, and I was really sick. I couldn't get out of bed. I had no energy. I couldn't get out of bed, and I was hyperventilating. I was breathing into a paper bag all day long. And one day my dad was staying with me every day. They were probably scared for me. And he said, "Have you eaten anything today?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You should eat something." So he made me a piece of toast and I was chewing it and chewing it. And I ended up having to spit it out because I had no saliva in my mouth. And thank goodness I ended up going to the psychiatrist and he put me on antidepressants, and otherwise I don't know what I would have done. I just wanted to go to sleep and not wake up. And I thought about taking sleeping pills, but I just kept thinking about my husband and my kids, and I couldn't do it to them.
Thank you. I've no further questions.
Does anyone else have any questions?
No, Your Honour.
I do, Your Honour, if the Commission, please. I do.
You do? Yes.
BCB, obviously I represent you before the Commission. If I could take you to, excuse me, your initial complaint, if you like, to BCF.
Yes.
And that you talk about it at paragraph, excuse me, I think it's 48 of your statement. She had indicated to you that she had suffered abuse from her uncle.
Yeah.
That's right. And then you told her, as you note in your statement, that something had happened to you. Is that right?
Yeah.
Did you give her any details about, not about the perpetrator, but what had happened to you?
A little bit. Like, I know I said in my statement that I told her what happened to me, but I didn't tell her everything that happened to me. I just said, something similar happened to me.
Did she give you the specifics of her abuse?
Not really. That was a long time ago. I can't really remember exactly.
So when you say something similar had happened to me,
yeah,
did you tell her any more about what had happened to you?
yes, I told her about how my friend's father had used to stick his tongue in my mouth when he kissed me, and that he came into the bathroom and perved at me, and I think that might have been all I spoke to her about. I did tell her about him coming into my room and wanting to show me his penis.
Is the next thing that you can recall, just in relation to how these meetings came about between with Max Hawley and Doug Jackson and Bill Neal? Is it the case that you were out preaching?
Yes.
And Max drove up to you?
He drove up to me, yes. I was out in the preaching work and he drove up to me and he said, "Oh, can I come and visit you this afternoon?" And he wanted to visit.
Who
my
were you with
husband
at
and
the time, if anybody?
I think I was with my husband. And
Do you remember what you said to him when he asked, "Can I come and visit?"
yes, I said he could come round that afternoon, yeah.
And did Max come alone to your home on
Yes.
that occasion?
Yeah, the
Do you
first
remember-
time.
Do you remember what he said to you?
Yes, he started talking about if you told a friend some information that was quite serious, and they said you should tell the elders, and you didn't. Hold on. Can't remember exactly how he said it.
Did you eventually work out what he was talking about?
Yeah, he was trying to. I think he was trying to explain that BCF was obviously feeling bad because she'd told someone about what I'd said and was worried about my reaction.
Is it the case that you realised that he was talking about the
That's when I realised that
contact with Bill Neal?
that BCF had told somebody about what I told her.
And you burst into tears at that time?
Yeah.
And the next thing you recall is it the case that there was a meeting with Max present, is that right?
Yes.
Doug Jackson and...
No, the next meeting was Max and Bill and my husband and I.
So Max and Bill and your husband and yourself.
Yes.
So two elders were present,
Yes.
but one of them was your abuser.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And was that at your home?
That was in my lounge room.
At the time, did you feel... I withdraw that. You were 22 at the time, is that right?
Oh, yeah, I think I was 22, yes. We'd just been married for a couple of years.
And you were both in the faith?
Yes.
Is that right? And you remain in the faith? Is that right?
I'm taking a break
Right.
at the moment.
But at the time, you certainly, is it the case, didn't feel that you could question the process of what was occurring?
I was just doing as I was told.
And when you say just doing as you were told, do you mean from Max Hawley?
Yes.
You indicate...
I assumed that he knew the correct procedure and I was just going along with what he said because I respected him.
Were you told by Max that if there had been indecent contact between you and Bill that you could go to the police?
No.
That you should go to the police?
No.
That it was criminal behaviour
No.
that you were alleging?
No.
When Bill Neal attended with Max, were you pressed for detail as to what Bill had?
Yes, Max said, I believe that Bill, in the course of whatever they were asking me, he said, I believe that Bill asked you if you wanted to see his penis. And I said yes. And then Bill looked at me and said, do you think I was joking? And I said, I don't know.
Did you feel at the time that you were really being invited to question your own belief in what had happened?
Yes. I was questioning whether I misunderstood.
And the next meeting was also at your home, is that right?
Yes.
And present was Doug Jackson and Max Hawley and Bill again.
Yes.
Looking back on it now, how do you feel about the appropriateness of the first meeting, Max coming with Bill, your abuser, to your home?
I felt very, very uncomfortable. I couldn't say anything about what really happened with him there because I felt like he still had control over me and what I said, and that whatever I said would be, he would be cross-examining me and saying that it was my word against his.
So when you say he would be cross-examining, you meant your
Bill.
abuser, Bill Neal.
Yes.
You were fearful of that, and indeed it did occur. Is that right?
Yes.
And in relation to the second meeting, you describe in your statement as Bill was defensive, and I think you described defiant as well.
Yes.
Spoke about you wearing revealing clothing.
Yes.
did you feel the same way in the sense that you were, your version, your credibility was being tested?
Yes, definitely.
And that you weren't being supported in your
Yes.
version of events?
I didn't feel supported at all.
Did you understand what the process was?
No.
Did you understand why this was occurring, why these people were attending your home and violating your space, if you like, in relation to this inquiry?
I didn't question their methods because I thought they would know the correct procedure because they were the authority in the church, in Jehovah's Witnesses.
And did you understand it was an inquiry as to whether or not Bill should remain an elder? Was that ever explained to you?
Not really. I guess I still just thought it was my word against his, and that they were just trying to find out what happened.
Were you, having been raised from 10 in the faith of Jehovah's Witness, did you understand the rules, if you like, about when someone makes an accusation against another? That is...
With minor incidents, you approach the person and try to sort it out with each other if you can. If you can't, you... I know now that you can talk to two trusted friends, two trusted sisters in the congregation. I didn't understand that at the time, though. I don't know whether that was ever a rule.
When I say a rule, do you understand that it's a reliance upon biblical teaching is noted for this, that for someone to be found guilty within the church of wrongdoing or within the faith, they have to either have confessed or that there be two or more witnesses?
I didn't know any kind of... I didn't know that then.
Now, can I ask you this? Did you feel when the two elders were at your home at the second meeting and Max was present with Doug and Bill, did you feel in control of the process?
No.
Did you feel supported?
No, I didn't feel supported. I guess in a way I was trying to control it because I didn't tell the full story.
Yes. Do you feel now that you should have been encouraged at that time to go to the police?
Yes.
You have an understanding now that Bill Neal's conduct towards you in relation to the tongue kissing is at least assaults of an indecent kind?
Yes.
And that the incident in the bathroom where you were penetrated and oral sex performed upon you were arguably incidents of sexual intercourse without consent?
Yes.
Just in relation to the process that took place, do you think you should have been confronted by your abuser at the time in your own home?
No.
And do you think there should have been females involved?
Yes.
Did you feel during the process that, particularly when when Bronwyn phoned you, someone that you loved and cared about, Bronwyn phoned you and indicated to you that Bill hadn't abused you? You've given evidence about phoning Max and telling him about that, and then Max calling you back and saying, please stop talking about this effectively, out of respect for the Neal family. Did you feel that that was the emphasis, respect for the Neal family?
At the time, I just did as I was told.
Just in a moment. In relation to the issue of compensation. It's the case that you have spent 7 years in therapy with a psychiatrist. You're no longer seeing a psychiatrist at the moment, is that right?
No.
And you're currently on antidepressants. You remain on antidepressants.
Yes.
You're currently undergoing neuro-emotional therapy with a chiropractor.
Yes.
All those things, of course, have cost you money, correct?
Yeah.
And you would welcome compensation if it were offered by the
I
faith,
would,
is that right?
Yes, I would.
Is it the case that you're also grateful to the Royal Commission?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Nothing
Thank
further.
you so much.
Does anyone else have any questions?
No, Your Honour.
Thank you, BCB. Thank you for coming and telling us your story.
Welcome.
You're
Thank
formally
you.
excused.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness, Your Honour, will be Max Hawley.
Is yours hard to read? Do we have any better copies of Mr. Hawley's statement? The ones we've got are quite hard to read.
It's being arranged, I'm told, Your Honour.
Mr. Hawley, it's necessary for you to be sworn. Would you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
Bible, please.
There's a Bible there which I think may be appropriate. You hold it in your hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
that the evidence I give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you. Take your seat, please. Yes, Mr. Stewart.
Would Your Honour like me to wait until
No,
we've
no,
got the
keep
better
going.
copy?
Keep going, but
Mr. Hawley, do you have before you a copy of your statement, which is
I think we need to identify him first.
dated?
I think we need his name first.
What are your full names, Mr. Hawley?
Full name, Maxwell Frederick Hawley.
Thank you. Do you have a copy of your statement 7 July 2015 before you?
Yes.
Are there any corrections or amendments you'd like to make to that statement?
No, I think it's complete.
Do you confirm the statement is true and correct?
Yes.
I tender the statement.
It'll become Exhibit 29-2.
Mr. Hawley, you've been a Jehovah's Witness essentially your whole life, is that right?
That's correct.
You have been a Dawesville congregation elder since November 2012, and you served there as secretary, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you were appointed in an elder in the Narrogin congregation in 1988, and you served there as secretary too, is that right?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
And there was only one other elder there at that time, that was Bill Neal.
When I was first appointed, there were two elders. One was quite elderly, and I think he then moved back to Perth, so that left Bill and I. Later on, there were two other elders appointed, and we had a situation arose where they One was stood down and one moved away, so that left Bill and I at the time that this incident occurred.
Okay. And the first elderly elder that you referred to who moved back to Perth, was that Jack Shaylaw?
That's correct.
And when Bill Neal was stood down in 1992, you became the presiding overseer, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Now, speaking generally now, but in your experience, as secretary of a congregation, what files or records do you keep?
We keep copies of the letters that are sent from the branch. We keep publisher record cards that report all their time spent in the ministry. Collate that information each month and send the details to the branch. We write letters when someone moves to another congregation and send a letter of introduction along with that. We also receive letters from other congregations when publishers move in. We keep records of committee cases that are held, judicial committee cases and things like that of a sensitive nature are kept on file too in case we need to refer back to them at a later time. But those are only usually seen by the ones acting on that committee at the time.
Is there a file or a record for each member of the congregation?
No, only the publisher record card, which details how much time they spend in the ministry each month.
And in respect of the files of a sensitive nature or records of a sensitive nature that you described following committee hearings, judicial committee hearings and so on, for how long are those retained?
I know we've had some information recently that after a certain period of time they are destroyed, but ones involving this particular type of case are supposed to be kept indefinitely.
And who has access to those records?
If it's a judicial case, then only the committee members that served on that committee, I understand, have access to go into that. They're all kept in the same place, but in the congregation I serve in now, all of the elders have access to the congregation file if they need to refer back to some of the letters that are on there or other records and so on.
And what information or records are passed on to the branch office?
The report each month for how much ministry is conducted by the congregation is compiled, and that's sent each month. Each year there is information logged about different activities at the congregation, how many publishers there are, how many unbaptised publishers and so on. That's just a brief overview. That's also sent to the branch. If they request information, then we might need to send a letter to them requesting that information. And sometimes for clarification of information, we might contact them in that way.
I gather from the documents I've seen that the congregation elders will also report to the branch on the outcome of judicial committee hearings.
Oh, that's correct. Sorry, yes.
If we could have a look at paragraph 2.2 of your statement, that's on page 2. You'll see in the last line you mention victims being encouraged to report abuse. Are we to understand that as a report to the elders? Is that right?
Yes.
And also in 2.3, last sentence, you say the relevant Bible principles make it clear that failure to report another's wrongdoing can make one responsible before God, and this is emphasized to the congregation. I take it again that the reference there to reporting another's wrongdoing is to report to an elder.
Yes, in Leviticus, those that become aware of wrongdoing, not actually having done it themselves, but if they hear of it, then they report it to the elders, so that if the person isn't forthcoming, then the elders can step in and handle it.
So these references in these two paragraphs to reporting, that's not reporting to the secular authorities.
No, it's just to the elders at that stage.
Is it the expectation that a member of the church must report any other member's wrongdoing to the elders? Or is it only particular types of wrongdoing?
The encouragement is, depending on the seriousness of it, I guess too, is that they go to the person that's committed the wrongdoing and encourage them to go to the elders first, and basically making a proviso that if they don't, then the person that's become aware of it will approach the elders and let them know of it. Does that make myself clear enough?
So I can understand that in respect of, say, less serious issues that arise between people. Are there particular kinds of transgressions or wrongdoing or sins, as I understand you would call it, that must be reported to the elders?
Sins that we would have brought to the elders' attention more of the serious nature, things that could result in a judicial committee case being formed, so matters of a sexual nature and things like that. Other matters where it's just someone's upset at somebody, we would encourage them to go ahead and try and sort that problem out themselves. If it became worse, and eventually the elders were called in to try and arbitrate or whatever, but normally following the Bible principles, that is, they try to work those situations out themselves.
And can you assist by explaining where the line is drawn, or how the line is drawn between what's of a more serious nature requiring reporting and what isn't?
Yeah, the more serious nature are things set out in the scriptures that could result in someone being removed from the congregation if they're unrepentant. So sexual immorality and all the stages and things that covers, homosexuality, bestiality, all of those sorts of things.
And that would include child sexual abuse?
Absolutely, yes.
And those things are the ones, I take it, that are set out in the handbooks?
Yes, how we go about instituting the protocol and handling of those aspects, yes.
Now, turning to the case specifically of BCB, and perhaps we can have up on the screen paragraph 49 of BCB's statement. Now you'll see that BCB has said that you asked to speak to her on the basis of information you had received. Do you recall or remember the person BCF who's referred to there? That's a friend of hers to whom she had spoken. The first name of that person, which we're avoiding saying, it should be on a list in front of you?
Yes, I remember, but I don't remember her coming to see me.
Do you remember how you first got to hear of these issues that BCB raised in relation to Bill Neal?
From my recollection, it was BCB and BCC that came to see me at my home and tell me about the allegations.
When you say, from your recollection, you seem somewhat hesitant about that, is that because of the passage of time?
Yes, yes.
Mr. Hawley, this allegation, I take it, when it came to you, you would have seen as a serious one.
Absolutely. There's a huge breach of trust, Your Honour.
Yeah, and as a consequence, I assume it would have stood out for you at the time. There's something unusual.
At the time, it was something that I hadn't dealt with before, and yes, it was a very serious nature. I took it as a huge breach of trust, not only for the person involved, but for the whole congregation. It would have repercussions that would flow through.
And the matter was reported to you because you were in a position of responsibility?
Yes.
Did you take any notes?
No, I didn't.
Can you help us?
I may have done at the time, I'm sorry, but...
You may have done.
I may have, but
Where are they now?
they would have been destroyed.
Why?
We don't like to have any notes outside of what's kept on file in the congregation.
Why don't you like to have notes of a serious allegation?
There are brief notes kept in the file, but all other notes are destroyed.
Why is that?
I guess it's because we don't want them to fall into the wrong hands of other people to find them and go through them.
What are the wrong hands?
Well, we don't want our wives knowing what our stuff, what sort of things we're dealing with. We don't want other people in the congregation coming across that information.
So you want to keep it secret to the elders, is that what it amounts to?
I don't know about secret, but we want to try and limit the amount of people that have to have a look at that information, yes.
And why is it that you want to limit the people who will have access to the information?
Just to protect them, I guess. We don't...
Protect who?
Protect the person that's involved in it and the rest of the congregation so that they don't have to know these... I don't know, it's just the protocol that we've had in, so we'll just follow that information. Yeah.
And would you do the same thing today if someone came and reported to you a serious allegation of sexual assault? Would you destroy any notes?
Yes, that's our practice.
And what about telling other authorities? Are you aware of your obligations if someone tells you of a serious allegation of sexual assault?
If we have any hesitation, we contact the branch for advice on how we should proceed legally and scripturally. We don't we don't report it to the police. I think we encourage them to do that, but we give them the assistance to do that if they need that.
How do you encourage people to report to the police?
My understanding is a little bit unclear because I've never had to do it, so I'm not fully aware on the process, but if it did come to me, I would be just saying, this is a matter that you need to talk to the police about or the legal authorities and pursue it that way.
The allegation that came to you, you accepted was serious. Have you in your time as an elder had any other people come to you to report a serious allegation of a sexual nature?
Not of sexual assault, but generally misconduct on their own part or someone that they know of.
What do you mean by misconduct?
Well, if someone's committed immorality with somebody else, then that's been brought to my attention, either by the person that's done it in the way of confession, or it may be that they've heard about it and brought it to my attention and we've investigated it and handled it that way.
Yes, Mr. Stewart.
You said a moment ago to His Honour, Mr. Hawley, you said that in relation to reporting to the police, you would say to the person, look, this is a matter that you need to talk to the police about. or the legal authorities and pursue it in that way. Now, what sort of matter would that be? What sort of matter in your mind would be one that you would say to someone, they must go and report to the police?
It would be in the matters of an abuse situation where someone had been forcibly, something like this instance, or probably even worse, or if someone had been raped, or that sort of a matter where police proceedings would be needed.
Now, in this particular case, what were you told initially? You say you spoke with BCB and her husband. What was reported to you?
That the elder concerned had acted inappropriately while she had been staying at his home. From my recollection, it was more to do with the fondling of her breasts, but I think there was also an accusation about him watching her in the shower, and that's from most of my recollection. I think there was inappropriate kissing of some sort too. But
And these events occurred when she was a minor?
that's correct. She was staying at his home. She'd finished school and was working at a bank, and because her family lived 45 minutes out of town, she would stay with them during the week and go home to her family on the weekends.
And did it occur to you that these were serious allegations that were made?
Any breach of trust, and particularly by an elder in that situation, was viewed very seriously.
And that fondling the breasts of a minor, but indeed anyone without their consent, would be a crime?
I think that occurred to me at the time, and certainly has done since then, but the way that we handle it now is totally different to what we did back then.
Yes, well, we'll stick with back then for now.
Yeah.
And observing someone whilst showering without their consent is a serious allegation, not only within the church's view,
Absolutely.
but even outside the church.
Mm.
And inappropriate kissing. In other words, by that I take it you mean tongue kissing.
That's what I understand.
Of a minor.
Yeah.
That's a crime too. Did you appreciate that?
Probably not like I should have done. Well, it shocked me to have that accusation brought to my attention. I knew it wasn't right. I didn't realise it might have been a criminal matter though.
And did you give any consideration to whether you should report it to the police?
I didn't, no.
Did you give any consideration to whether BCB should be encouraged to report it to the police?
No, I didn't.
Very well, we'll take the luncheon adjournment.
Stand.